Today, we are diving into a field that really gets under the hood of how companies and teams actually, well, work. It's called organizational development, or OD for short.
So let's start with a question we've all faced. I mean, think about it. You've been on a school project, a sports team, maybe a job, where one group just clicks, everything flows. And then you've been in another group that's just a complete train wreck. So what gives? What's the secret sauce that makes one team great and another one not so much?
A lot of the time, a struggling organization shows some really obvious symptoms, kind of like a person who's sick. You might see people quitting all the time, that's high turnover, or maybe customers are constantly complaining. That spark of innovation, it's gone. And of course, the profits start to drop. These are all alarm bells that something is fundamentally wrong with the organization's health.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to give this whole topic a full checkup. First, we'll figure out what OD even is. Then, we'll walk through the roadmap, the actual process. After that, we'll open up the toolkit and look at the treatments. And finally, we'll get into the philosophy, the core beliefs behind it all.
So first things first, what in the world is organizational development? Well, to stick with our analogy, if an organization is sick, OD is the specialist you bring in to figure out what's wrong.
Now, the key thing here is that OD isn't just about winging it or trying random fixes. Nope, it's a planned, scientific process. It actually uses insights from fields like psychology and sociology to understand why people and groups behave the way they do at work, and then it uses that knowledge to make real, lasting change.
OD looks at a company in basically 3 layers. On the surface, you've got the climate. That's the daily mood, the vibe of the office. You can think of it like the weather. Is it sunny and cheerful, or is it kind of gloomy? But beneath that, you have the culture. This is the deep stuff, the unwritten rules, the shared values. It's not the weather, it's the entire climate system. And finally, you have the strategies, the actual processes for getting work done. To really fix anything, you have to understand how all 3 of these things are connected.
All right, let's move on to the actual process. This is the playbook, the step-by-step examination that an OD specialist uses to diagnose and treat the problem. This 5-stage model is pretty much the modern roadmap. It all starts with entering and contracting. That's like the first doctor's visit, where you talk about the symptoms and agree on what to look for. Then comes diagnosing, where you run the tests, surveys, interviews, you name it, to find the root cause. After that, it's time for intervening and taking action. This is the treatment plan. Step 4, evaluating and feedback, is the follow-up appointment to see if the treatment is actually working. And finally, termination/exit. This is about making sure the patient, the organization, can stay healthy on its own long after the specialist has left.
Now, this whole modern process is really built on a super simple but incredibly powerful idea from one of the pioneers of OD, a social psychologist named Kurt Lewin. Lewin's idea was brilliant. He said that to make any real change, you first have to unfreeze things. Think of a block of ice. You can't reshape it when it's frozen solid. You have to melt it down first. In an organization, that means shaking things up and getting people to see that the old way of doing things isn't working anymore. This is honestly the hardest part, because you're fighting against that "but we've always done it this way" mentality. Only after things are unfrozen can you introduce the change, the new behaviors and processes. And then, and this is crucial, you have to refreeze it all, making that new way the standard so people don't just slide back into old habits.
Okay, so we've got the process down, but what are the actual tools that an OD practitioner uses to make all this happen? What's in the toolkit? Let's take a look.
Right. In the world of OD, these tools are called interventions. And let me be clear, we're not talking about just doing some random team-building games or trust falls. These are very specific, structured activities. They're designed on purpose to interrupt the old, unhelpful ways of doing things and to introduce better, more effective patterns.
And these interventions generally fall into 4 main buckets. You've got human process interventions, which are all about people, how they talk to each other, how they work in teams. Then there are technostructural interventions. That's about the nuts and bolts, like the company's structure or the technology it uses. The human resource management bucket deals with things like performance reviews and how people get rewarded. And finally, strategic interventions are the big picture stuff, helping the company adapt to the world around it.
So if we look closer at that first category, human process, it's all about the people side. This is where you find things like team building, workshops on how to handle conflict, or even bringing in a neutral third party to mediate. Leadership development is a huge one, and there's this classic one called T groups or training groups, which were these really intense, unstructured group sessions designed to help people get honest feedback and build self-awareness.
The other categories, well, they cover the rest of the organization's machinery. A techno-structural intervention isn't just about moving boxes on an org chart. A redesign is really about making information flow better. An HR intervention, like a new goal-setting system, is designed to get everybody on the same page, pulling in the same direction. And strategic interventions are for those massive shifts, like trying to change the entire company culture, or making sure two companies can actually work together after a merger without clashing.
So finally, what's the philosophy behind all this? What's the belief system that guides this work? You can think of it as the OD practitioner's version of the Hippocratic Oath. At its very, very core, OD is driven by humanistic values. This quote here from way back in 1972 just nails it. It's about seeing people, as human beings, not just as human resources or cogs in a production machine. It's about creating a workplace where people can actually thrive and be their best selves.
And that whole philosophy leads directly to these objectives. The real goal is to build trust between people, to create a place where it's safe to actually talk about problems instead of just ignoring them. It's about managing conflict in a healthy way and just getting people to cooperate better. Because when you create that kind of trusting environment, people are way more open to change. They don't fight it because they feel psychologically safe.
And this, right here, this is the main takeaway. The real ultimate goal of any good OD practitioner is to basically work themselves out of a job. Seriously, it's not about making the company dependent on them forever. It's about teaching the organization how to monitor its own health, how to diagnose its own problems, and how to heal itself. It's about building a capacity for constant self-renewal.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. This stuff isn't just abstract theory for huge corporations. Think about any group you're in, a study group, a sports team, a club, maybe even your own family. How could applying just a little bit of this OD thinking, building more trust, confronting problems head on, focusing on people, make that group just a little bit healthier and a whole lot more effective?